In the 17th century, Dutch and English battleships, in miles-long formations, unleash violent broadsides against each other in years of ruinous and wretched war.
These battles are enormous. There's 100 ships on each side. There are thousands of men involved. If you lose this naval battle, the Dutch will lose their trade, they'll go bankrupt, the English will go bankrupt, they will lose the war. This is not about small beer, this is big business.
The English and the Dutch fought the largest sea battles in the age of sail, with firepower unequaled by any artillery force on land. In the balance hung each country's role in world trade for the next 2 centuries.
The Dutch and the British are the two great commercial powers of the Western world. Their merchants are fanning out across the globe from the West to the East Indies, and they're running into each other and shooting each other up.
All over the world, these emerging empires collide. But as these countries compete for market shares abroad, they must also forge personal liberty at home. People in both countries, for the first time in the modern era, are demanding that their governments guarantee personal freedoms, including freedom of religion.
Because of the religious conflicts in Europe, the Dutch had the realization that there had to be toleration, there had to be liberty of conscience, there had to be freedom of the individual.
While the Dutch guarantee religious freedoms, England wavers between modest toleration and a state religion strictly enforced. How these superpowers tolerated religious and personal freedoms would affect the lives of people in both societies. Within their own borders and on an island far from the center of the world, Manhattan, and in a country that would embrace these freedoms in its constitution a century later. But until there was stability within and between countries, personal freedoms were far from secure. And in the first half of the 17th century, religious wars ravaged Europe. Catholic Spain's armies attacked Protestant Holland. Religious quarrels in England erupted into a civil war. Thousands were killed. In England, the king, Charles I, fought with his parliament over taxes and with his people over religion.
Charles I was regarded by his people as being a tyrant who raised taxes without the consent of Parliament, and who was also trying to push the Church of England into the direction of Catholicism. And this was a country which was very, very anti-Catholic.
For almost a century, the English viewed Catholic rulers as arbitrary and despotic. When Charles I tried to change religious practice, his people rebelled.
There was widespread rioting in 1640 and 41 against some of the religious innovations that he tried to introduce, though also against some of his Catholic advisors, and that fed into 1642 with the outbreak of the Civil War.
The army raised by Parliament to oppose King Charles I took on a political life of its own. Its zealous commander, Oliver Cromwell, after defeating royal armies, demanded Charles be tried and executed.
When the king's head was actually chopped off, the soldiers cheered and a great groan went up from the rest of the crowd.
With the death of Charles I, Cromwell soon annihilated an army led by the king's son, Charles II. Charles II narrowly escaped capture and sailed into years of long exile. Cromwell soon emerged as the leader of both the army and Parliament, who made him Lord Protector, a dictator by any other name. But Cromwell could not live forever.
So in 1658, Oliver Cromwell dies, and the years from 1658 to 1660 are complete utter political and economic chaos. And by the end of that period, popular opinion in England believes that the only way to restore stability in England is to return to the monarchy.
It may seem strange to anybody who's a citizen of a modern republic that the British should have a republic for just 11 years and then give it up and bring back their monarchy. But our only republic in Britain was not produced by revolution by the people, as in France, or by throwing off a foreign tyranny, as in America. It was produced by a small minority of the population who wanted to have a radical religion and radical politics. And what the people wanted was to have back the king and the aristocracy and the old church. And so they got it.
The road was lined 30 people deep all the way from Rochester to London. And the crowds got denser and denser as you got to London. It really was an immense sort of emotional release, really, with the king's return. This was England returning to normal. Finally getting over a very bad dream, returning to the natural rule of monarchy.
1660. Charles II was no longer a footnote to history, but at its center. To make certain his view of the Civil War endured, Charles entrusted Samuel Pepys to record his story. It is Samuel Pepys's secret diary that gave later generations the most intimate view of the reign of Charles II, often word for word.
Well, Mr. Pepys, we thank you for transcribing our story. It was a very brutal and bloody time.
Oh, it is my pleasure, Your Majesty. It is a story that should be comprehended by all.
Charles met Lady Castlemaine shortly after he returned from exile. The daughter of a loyalist aristocrat who lost his fortune in the Civil War, she became Charles' principal mistress for the next 10 years.
So, after the battle with Cromwell, his troops all around, how did you escape?
I took the resolution of putting myself into a disguise. With an ordinary pair of grey cloth breeches, a leathern doublet, and a green jerkin. I also cut my hair very short. As soon as I was disguised, I chose to trust Richard Penderell, a Roman Catholic.
Oh, would not Cromwell's troop rumble every Catholic house in the country?
Yes, but I knew they had hiding holes for priests. Penderell told me it would be very dangerous for me to stay either in the house or go out into the wood, as the enemy would be certain to search both. But he knew of one way to pass the next day, and that was to get up inside a great big oak.
Was not the oak in the wood?
No, it was separate and in plain sight, and so less suspicious. But we could view all around without being seen. Soldiers going up and down looking for persons escaped.
And all the Penderells pretending perfect ignorance. Very brave. Charles has rewarded them on his return.
In later consultations, Colonel Lane said that he had a sister who had a fair pretence of going to Bristol to a cousin of hers, and that she might take me thither as her servant. And from Bristol I might find shipping to get me out of England, which, with God's help, I did.
In the first years of his reign, Charles II worked to rebuild his power, wealth, and prestige. In 1664, he begins to focus on foreign affairs and to work that blunt tool of statecraft, military force. In America, he has just granted his brother James, Duke of York, all of the land centered on the Hudson River. But the Duke's new claim is not without problems. It includes a colony, New Netherland, owned and governed by the Dutch. It is that defect Charles now addresses.
Charles, you have served James a generous slice of America.
Yes, but even a small swallow of the Dutch will be a challenge to keep down for the Duke of York.
And that no doubt depends on our Colonel Nichols. He seems quite ready for his private instructions.
Your Majesty, Lady Castlemaine.
Colonel Nichols, as we publicly directed, you are to observe and report to us the sentiments of our bleak government in Massachusetts.
I will insinuate myself into the good opinion of the principal persons there, Your Majesty.
Privately. The greater goal of your endeavor is the seizing of Manhattan, reducing that people to an entire submission and obedience to us. Secure that whole region, so that the Dutch may no longer exercise that trade which they have wrongfully possessed themselves of. Trade now vested in our brother, the Duke of York.
Colonel Nichols departs for America with secret orders from Charles to take over the Dutch colony at Manhattan. The Dutch call their territory between the English colonies in New England and Virginia New Netherland. For 2 generations, the Dutch have shipped fur and foodstuffs down the mile-wide Hudson River to New Amsterdam, the colony's largest port at the tip of Manhattan Island. Manhattan supports farms, orchards, and land for grazing. By 1664, over 2,000 Dutch colonists live in New Amsterdam. After decades of conflict, they now live among and trade peaceably with Native Americans. As summer of 1664 ends, the harvests begin, and the whole of New Amsterdam breathes a festive air. But suddenly, on this balmy August day, an alarm sounds as warships appear in the harbor. The militia rushes to battle stations in the fort. Inside the fort, they await orders from Peter Stuyvesant, the Director General of this remote Dutch outpost.
How many ships?
4.
Guns?
About 100.
Troops?
1,000, plus 1,000 more Long Islanders with 100 horse. More gathering in Brooklyn by the hour.
What's their towns to every 3rd man?
They will not come.
What's their burgomeesters?
They will not fight.
My son?
He will not.
Our troops at 200?
150, General. 50 sick.
I have ill feelings about this day myself, Lieutenant. We have powder and shot for only a few hours. We must delay. Delay in the hope of timely reinforcements from the fatherland. Send the English general our request to know the purpose of his coming. He has not as yet, to our great surprise, given us any knowledge of his purpose. With 100 peace-loving guns, I'm sure he means no prejudice against us.
Lieutenant, in His Majesty's name, I do demand the town upon the island commonly known as Manhattan, with the fort there, rendered to His Majesty's obedience and protection. Tell your Director General that we do not wish the effusion of Christian blood, but without complete submission, you will provoke the miseries of war.
Stuyvesant had a little military experience. He really was an administrator. So when the frigates arrived, he tried to save New Amsterdam because he knew he couldn't defend it. It's quite clear that if Stuyvesant had decided to fight, that New Amsterdam would have suffered very much. His only chance was to play for time, and there was hope that relief forces from the Netherlands could come in and take over the colony once again, and that expectation was not unrealistic at all.
Finally, the threat of overwhelming force and generous terms from Nichols convinces Stuyvesant to surrender without firing a shot.
So giving up New Amsterdam was the right decision. It saved the town.
The terms maintain property rights and, as important, Dutch religious freedom. And as the Dutch swear allegiance to their new sovereign, Manhattan gets a new name, New York, after its prince and patron James, Duke of York. Charles II is confidently provoking the Netherlands, one of the largest maritime powers in the world. He knows that Cromwell's navy had defeated the Dutch in a war 10 years before, while he was in exile. What he does with the navy now will inevitably be compared to what Cromwell did with it in the First Anglo-Dutch War. This war, ostensibly about trade, was as ruinous as it was inconclusive. While the English were victorious in the home waters of the North Sea, the Dutch defeated them in the Mediterranean, destroying English trade, and in the Baltic, threatening the supply of English shipbuilding materials.
The Dutch idea essentially was that you just sailed at the enemy head on, you ran alongside, you fired off a few guns as you approached, but basically it came down to boarding. That was what the Dutch expected, and it was what the Dutch were good at.
The English discovered the only answer to this was not to try and do what the Dutch did, but to do something else. In the First Anglo-Dutch War, the English ships were bigger and more heavily armed. They had a firepower advantage, and that could best be used by forming a single line ahead and firing broadsides. And once you've knocked the Dutchmen's masts away, they don't maneuver very well. If you kill the crew, cripple the ship, you win the battle. So the English pioneered a firepower-based tactical revolution.
Off the southeast coast of England, near Gabbard, Cromwell's navy used the inline formation for the first time. It resulted in one of the worst defeats in Dutch naval history.
They carefully arranged themselves in line. The Dutch came at them in the same group of unorganized squadrons, and the English just chopped them to pieces, firing at them at long range for hour after hour.
17th century naval warfare is attritional combat. It's not decisive, it's not knockout. You don't sink the enemy ship with a single shot. You knock it to pieces and kill the crew. So it takes forever. It takes hours and hours to resolve these battles. Men will be knocked over by large, jagged pieces of wood, often referred to as splinters, but not the sort you get in your finger while you're doing carpentry. This splinter will be 6 feet long, it'll weigh 100 pounds, and it'll be razor sharp. And if it hits you, it won't stick in your finger, it'll cut you in half.
17 ships sunk or captured, thousands killed and wounded. After 2 years of war and the horrendous losses at Gabbard, the Dutch people looked to their government for relief. Two powerful factions in the Netherlands vie for power. One faction, rich burghers, the merchant elite, want desperately to end the war. Opposed to the wealthy merchants was the war party, called Orangists, led by Prince William of Orange. Because his wife, Mary Stuart, was the daughter of Charles I, William had naturally supported the English monarchy during the Civil War. He died of smallpox just a few days before Mary gave birth to their son, William III. William II's death left the Orangists leaderless and allowed the Republican burghers to gain control of the government. The merchant elite, hating the war that crippled their trade, installed their own leader, Johan de Witt.
De Witt was appointed in 1653 in a period of severe crisis. The Dutch were involved in a war against England, a war that they were not capable of winning. Their fleet was simply not strong enough. Johan de Witt was a very young lawyer from the city of Dordrecht, and he soon proved to be very capable. And what he believed is that a true republican regime should not be democratic in our modern sense of the word. It should basically be an aristocracy led by well-educated and well-off regents like himself.
The war is a disaster. We must end it. We can make our best terms now. Cromwell will be happy enough to make peace with us, his Protestant brethren, and make war on antichrists in Spain. Then we must build a fleet that can take English broadsides and give back in kind.
De Witt was really eager to conclude a peace treaty, and Cromwell surprisingly let him off the hook. The conditions more or less imposed on the Dutch were remarkably lenient.
Cromwell wanted to end the destructive war with the Dutch, but more importantly, he wanted to keep the Orangists, who were supporting Charles II in exile, from gaining power in the Netherlands.
The key to the peace treaty is not any sort of economic issue, it's the seclusion of the Prince of Orange from power in the Netherlands. That, for Oliver Cromwell, is the key element of the peace, and it's something which John de Witt is only too happy to accede to.
With the treaty, William III, only 3 years old, is formally excluded from power. When Charles II was restored to his throne, he tried to persuade Johan de Witt to reinstate his nephew William to his hereditary titles and privileges. De Witt refused, and even excluded Charles from a role in William's education. There was no love lost between De Witt and Charles, but Charles had larger problems at his restoration than the education of his nephew.
One of the great problems for the restored Stuart monarchy is poverty. The king has no money. The state isn't going to give him very much. The royal revenues aren't very great. So where does the money come from? Everybody believes there's only so much trade. You can't make new trade, you just grab the trade from somebody else. Who has the trade? The Dutch. Do we like the Dutch? No. They're republicans. They're not really our kind of people at all. So let's go and grab the trade from the Dutch.
Just as Charles II had sent Nichols to seize New Amsterdam, he also approved a raid on Dutch outposts down the coast of Africa by Robert Holmes, who, like Nichols, had supported his cause during his exile.
The classic Restoration military hatchet man is Robert Holmes. He's an old cavalier from the Civil War. He then takes to the sea, and he's kind of a mixture of a courtier and a pirate. Robert Holmes is given warships and is sent down to West Africa to wreak havoc among the Dutch markets and basically chase them away.
Secretary Roche, direct our ambassador to entreat Charles. What calls for this irresponsible violence from his subject, Robert Holmes? Along the coast of Africa, he has plundered our trade and possessed himself of our ships and forts.
Our appeal will amuse the king. No doubt Holmes sailed under the royal instruction of James, just as Nichols enjoyed the complicity of the king himself.
Our public stance will be to demand restoration and reparation, and to insist Holmes and Nichols be arrested upon their return. However, to effect a more direct restitution, we shall send the Reuter with our Mediterranean fleet to Africa, and then, God willing, to America.
De Witt had recruited Michael de Ruyter to command the Dutch Mediterranean fleet. He was experienced, highly skilled, and above all, loyal.
The English had captured some Dutch forts in West Africa. They had done that in a period of peace. John de Witt decided that it would be good to send a fleet in the Mediterranean to recapture it. But how could you keep this secret? Every decision would be mentioned to the English, certainly if you paid some money.
De Witt knows several Dutch legislators have been selling Dutch secrets to the English. So the Dutch leader sends these spies, one by one, to the next meeting. After they are gone, De Witt attaches the orders to send de Ruyter, his trusted admiral, with the Mediterranean fleet to Africa.
It is in the official minutes, but people are not going to read minutes. And the instruction for de Ruyter was immediately sent to Spain and reached him, and he immediately sailed to West Africa.
Charles knows nothing of de Ruyter's counter-raid to Africa, but might approve of it if he did. He needs war fever to get Parliament's support. He already has General Monk, the head of the army who restored Charles to his throne in a war lather. And while Charles feigns ignorance of Holmes' raid, Monk goads Samuel Pepys, an influential member of the Navy Board, to support the war program.
General Monk, now our Lord Albemarle, This is Mr. Samuel Pepys, the Earl of Montague's cousin, clerk of the Navy Board, and a very clever fellow.
We assured the ambassador on our princely word that we gave no commission or order to Captain Holmes to demonstrate on Africa. Nor do we know upon what grounds he proceeded to that act of hostility.
Well, I spoke with Holmes before he sailed. He discoursed of the good effects in some kind of a Dutch war, saying that the trade of the world is too little for us two, and therefore one must down.
The Dutch have too much trade, and we resolve to take it from them.
They were no friend to our king in exile until his restoration.
It was so. For years, to indulge Cromwell's ill will, the Dutch shunned me as they would a leper with intemperate decay. On news of my return as king, they celebrated us in The Hague with feast and dance, and they gave us a yacht.
What a pusillanimous people.
I tremble still to thoughts of Amboina.
Over a half-century ago, in Indonesia, at their trading post at Amboina, the Dutch capture a spy who implicates English merchants in a plot to seize the fort. The Dutch arrest, torture to confession, and behead the alleged English conspirators.
It was just for something which really burnt into the English psyche. There were poems about Amboina, there were plays about Amboina.
Amboina can again repeat anywhere the Dutch held power.
The only laws they respect derive from the broadsides of cannon.
All the court is mad for a Dutch war.
It seems in our whole kingdom I am the only soul for peace.
As an outsider to Charles' inner circle, Pepys may not appreciate the irony in Charles' peaceful sentiments. He does not know Charles authorized the Nichols and Holmes raids. But De Witt knows and has already sent de Ruyter to reclaim Africa. And De Witt does not intend to stop there.
Where is Holmes now?
Portugal, off the coast near Lisbon.
When will he arrive back in England?
2 months. De Ruyter has already retaken Goree and a number of English ships. He will sweep the coast by December.
Here, further orders to de Ruyter. After Africa, to the Caribbean. Inflict by way of reprisal as much damage as possible at Barbados, New Netherlands, Newfoundland. Seize as many merchantmen and stores of sugar and tobacco as you can bring home. Demolish those you cannot. Ransack their plantations, destroy their fisheries, then pursue home by the shortest course, north about England.
News of de Ruyter's successful counter-raid down the coast of Africa reaches England at about the same time as Holmes returns. Now, a war with the Dutch is virtually certain.
I hear fully the news of our being beaten to dirt at Guinea. De Ruyter with his fleet hath proceeded to the taking of whatever we have. Forts, goods, ships, and men. All of Holmes' work is undone.
Not all. He has arrived at Plymouth with many prizes. Gold, ivory, Dutch ships.
What says Holmes of the reports of cowardice of his captains?
He comes now. Ask him directly.
Monk, how goes it?
Holmes, welcome home.
Mr. Pepys?
So, how big the treasure?
Hundreds of thousands of pounds. We shall have a count soon. The prize commission sniffs over the ships as a scavenger over a meaty carcass.
Major Holmes, I should warn you. Some claim that you exceeded your orders to protect our trade only.
Protect our trade? We had no trade to protect. No. I went to bash the Dutch over the head and steal as much of their trade by force as I could. That's what I interpreted my instructions to mean.
And that is certainly what they were meant to mean.
And that's what I did.
Does de Ruyter's raid trouble you?
Certain of my captains may have yielded too easily, but that is conjecture for Whitehall warriors. Broadsides look very different at 50 feet. De Ruyter's success means there will be war and great opportunity.
I worry of our shortage of money to fund our navy.
We will take our funding from Dutch merchantmen. The king sends Allen to meet the Smyrna fleet. Many rich prizes,
Let us hope. Good day, gentlemen.
Pepys has many firm opinions for one with no experience.
He is an irritating fellow. But he has a pretty wife who I feign to be free and friends with. Perhaps after the war.
Pepys' diary records his shock at Holmes' attention to his wife at parties, as it records his dismay at the rush into an ill-advised war.
The English made an attack, again unprovoked and without declaration of war, on a big Dutch merchant fleet. And of course the Dutch were enraged, and the Dutch knew now that they couldn't possibly avoid major war.
The attack, not against our outposts, but against the heart of our commerce from the Mediterranean, means we are de facto at war with England. For your approval, orders to the Admiralties. After consideration, it is resolved and concluded to authorize you to attack, conquer, and ruin the English everywhere. Down with them. Both in and out of Europe, on land and sea, with whatever force, through God's blessing, you may now have under our authority. Charles will have his war!
Charles wants war, but the war he wants, short, decisive, and profitable, may not be the war he gets. The Navy is already spending Parliament's largest authorization ever, over £2 million, and Charles knows the danger many will encounter, including his own brother, James, and his longtime friend and companion in exile, Lord Falmouth.
Falmouth? Falmouth! Riley, our painter, claims this to be my portrait. If they're not fish, I am an ugly fellow.
Oh, no, Your Majesty. It is just Riley's irregular palsy. As he recovers, so will your portrait.
Falmouth, I very believe thou art the wickedest dog in all England.
For a subject, Your Majesty, I believe I am.
Oh, here's James and his guards.
Then, Your Majesty, I will take my leave.
My dearest Falmouth, take care of James. Until we breed our queen, he is all we have.
Charles' concern for his brother James is not only personal, but dynastic. Charles' 2-year marriage to Catherine of Braganza has produced no heirs. Though James is next in line to the throne, he will still sail with and command the fleet, with his best captains, like Monk and Holmes.
Your Majesty.
General Monk, our brother James has discoursed on the good effect in the last Dutch war of formations in line.
Yes, Your Majesty. And signals. If we get the weather wind, we form into a line of 3 squadrons, with full fleet 8 miles long.
Ships in battle formation usually sailed on attack, at an angle to the wind. If their opponents were sailing on the same tack, the upwind fleet was the fleet on the side closer to the wind. The downwind fleet was the fleet further from where the wind was blowing. The upwind fleet was said to have the weather wind. The downwind fleet was said to be to the lee. If any ship to lee tried to grapple, it would sail into the wind, lose speed, and be subjected to broadsides from more than one ship.
What if the Dutch try to grapple?
As long as we have the wind, we can stay back and use our heavy cannons to full result. No ship of ours blocks the field of fire from any other.
What about you old pirates, Holmes? Can you be taught new tricks?
Yes, Your Majesty. As long as the Dutch attack in piecemeal squadrons, we can stand off and stomp them.
They will cluster about their many admirals, as long as one Dutch city distrusts the others, which is to say, long enough for us to prevail. We wish you all good fortune.
Your Majesty.
The Dutch fleet is not really a national navy. They have 5 different admiralties. The 2 biggest ones are Rotterdam and Amsterdam, which is both Holland, but Rotterdam and Amsterdam are great rivals. And the 3rd big one is Zeeland. Admirals from different admiralties don't have an agreed order of seniority. They had a serious political problem there in actually trying to impose unity on this fleet.
Under De Witt's leadership, the competing Dutch cities have agreed to do one thing: build a strong navy. The result is dozens of large warships that can, as De Witt had urged 10 years ago,
take English broadsides and give back in kind.
These new ships were coming into service just as the Second Dutch War started. The English were actually not sufficiently aware that the Dutch were catching up with them in terms of building serious warships.
The biggest class was between 160 and 170 feet, and they carried up to 80 guns. That was still a little bit less than what the English had, but on the other hand, our guns were a little bit heavier. When the ship fired one broadside, that is all the guns on one side of the ship, it lost half a ton in weight. It must have been terrible to watch and to hear.
De Witt's new fleet is not quite ready in early 1665. And more important, de Ruyter, the one leader all admiralties will follow, is not back from his raid to the Caribbean and the east coast of America. Looking for a reliable stand-in for de Ruyter, De Witt appoints Baron van Obdam to command the Dutch fleet. Obdam has seen success in the Baltic Sea between wars, but now faces a battle of unprecedented scale. The Dutch and English fleets each have over 100 ships and 20,000 seamen. But while the Dutch warships capable of firing half-ton broadsides are not yet in service, the English already have 27. As important, the English have developed tactical maneuvers to use their superior firepower to devastating effect.
The English had 2 maneuvers that they used to change course. The first was just tacking in succession. The first ship in the line tacked and everyone followed him around at the same spot. Tacking from the rear meant that the ship that initiated the move was the ship at the tail end of the line. And as soon as he started, all the others tried to do so as well.
Tacking from the rear took extraordinary coordination, signaling, and skill. When the English began doing the maneuver with fleets of 100 ships, even the Dutch, no mean sailors themselves, were in awe.
The English fleet moved north a little bit off Lowestoft. Both sides were actively seeking a battle. The Dutch commander, Obdam, knew that he was outgunned, but he needed a battle to drive the English from the sea before that rich East India convoys came home. Off Lowestoft, fleets met in 2 head-on passes, and at the end of the second pass, the English were able to tack together and get on the same tack with the Dutch and to windward of them, and then pounded them to pieces the same way they had at the Battle of the Gabbard in 1653.
Right at the heart of it, James's flagship, the Royal Charles, engages Obdam's flagship, and it's one-on-one, and eventually Obdam is killed. His flagship blows up. The Dutch don't know who's in command, so they flee. The English chase them, and but for an unfortunate order given by one of James's courtiers, the war might well have been over that night.
To keep James out of harm's way, one of his courtiers halts the pursuit of the Dutch. Earlier in the battle, 3 members of the court standing close to James were cut to pieces. One of those killed was Charles' dearest friend, Falmouth.
Hold there. The king receives no audience. He mourns poor Falmouth, as we all do. I am troubled for the king, He has not eaten well nor slept these last few nights. Pray for him.
The king, it seems, is much troubled at the fall of my Lord of Falmouth.
Wish him not alive again, Pete. He was a man of too much pleasure to do the king any good, or offer any good office to him.
But he was a man of great honor, and did show it in his going with the Duke, the most that ever any man did, as did Sansom, the same our bravest admiral, who I am in position, humbly, to replace.
But the Duke has determined the flag will go to Harman, his own captain.
Harman? 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 I do see that I have enemies about me. They do me prejudice. They will not suffer me to rise. I cannot continue. I will resign.
A rash, proud coxcomb. He will not be dissuaded. Is Holmes so rich he seeks occasion of leaving the service?
The Duke will take his resignation now, with some disgust. But by the next fleet season, all will be friends. Holmes will have a good ship again, and honours too, no doubt.
While England mourns a few courtiers, the Dutch mourn a calamity.
The Dutch, in that particular case, lost about 17 vessels one way or the other, and something like 5,000 plus dead. Now, these are large numbers when talked about of people coming from maritime communities, and they make a huge dent in societies. It's not just the size of the losses, it's the relative impact it has on coastal communities.
The first result of the Dutch War is a terrific victory for the English off Lowestoft, one of the great naval victories of British history. And the Dutch are trounced. The trouble is, being a naval battle, they just sail home and start getting repaired.
Charles keeps pressure on the Dutch by bribing the German Bishop of Munster to attack the Dutch on their eastern border. Munster has had territorial disputes with the Dutch and is eager to exploit their weak land defenses. With the Dutch army unprepared for the assault, the bishop quickly occupies several towns. Everything is going Charles' way, but then, out of nowhere, the plague.
The plague hitting London in 1665, and people were dropping dead in the streets like leaves were falling off trees in autumn.
But Lord, what a sad time it is to see poor wretches in the streets. Over 7,000 dead in 1 week. The biggest bill yet, which is very grievous for us all.
The plague is the beginning of a reversal of English fortune. Early the next year, even the attack by the Bishop of Munster goes bad. It convinces King Louis XIV of France to honor his defensive treaty with the Dutch. Louis has the largest and best-trained army in Europe. His navy is not as large as England's, but it tips the strategic balance in favor of the Dutch.
The French, under Louis XIV, the strongest power in Western Europe, now come in on the Dutch side and declare war upon Britain. And that means that Charles is back to square one with twice as many enemies as before.
The spirit of the Dutch soars with the announcement of their new French alliance. And they finally commission their powerful warships. As important, De Witt can deliver these new ships to a leader he can trust. De Ruyter has returned.
After the Battle of Lowestoft, the Dutch flag officers met and decided that they needed to adopt the English system and needed to adopt it as quickly as possible.
De Witt and De Ruyter review the fleet, which now includes the newly commissioned warships. They then meet with Cornelis Tromp, second in command, and Cornelis Evertson, a young captain who fought at Lowestoft.
With France now with us, we have a new war. At least our dear friend Munster has something to think about.
Charles has no money to pay him. Louis will send Munster home. But what will Louis do by sea? What think you, Tromp? Thank you for joining us. My job was to have been yours after Obdam perished. It is a noble patriot to give service to his country.
Noble indeed. I am here. De Witt knows how to persuade or twist arms as need be. To answer, Louis will do as little as possible and still preserve his honore. He may distract some of the English fleet.
Good. Everton, you're at Lowestoft. What caused that difficulty?
The English formation. Unified, in line, using their big guns. They turned in unison. The whole fleet. After that, our small squadrons were like so many nets for swatting.
But we have always been able to close on board.
If they have the weather wind, we never will.
This is troubling. Can we not fight as we have done for 100 years?
Not and win. And all the captains feel as I do.
Tromp, what think you?
The young captains are right. So many times half our fleet cannot fire because our own ships are in the way.
Does it bother you that we imitate the English system?
No, they are not so clever. Even a blind hog will find a truffle.
Well, let us hope that their blind hogs are at the tillers this summer.
While the Dutch practice their new tactical formations, Charles plans to send part of his fleet under his cousin Prince Rupert to block the French fleet sailing into the Channel, while reserving the larger part of his fleet to face the Dutch under the Duke of Albemarle. But splitting the fleet is a risk. The Dutch will almost certainly outnumber Albemarle's squadrons. So Charles needs his best captains to sail with Albemarle, and he recruits Holmes back into service.
Well, Sir Robert, your knighthood sits well on you, as does your new ship, Defiance.
Both are great honours, Your Majesty. I hope to give you many victories in return.
You will, I'm certain. Your squadron is manned and fitted?
Within the week. I go with Albemarle's group, duties to which I must now attend, Your Majesty.
Monk, I mean Albemarle. You have been Duke since our restoration. I will reform my mind to Albemarle.
Your Majesty may call me as he pleases. My wife even calls me Monk still, in our bedchamber.
The Duke of Albemarle, the name doubly reforms me then, so as to avoid your bedchamber. Too crowded for us three. Albemarle, what think you of our split of the fleet?
Until we know the French positions, a necessary evil, Your Majesty. We cannot let the French combine with the Dutch.
Aye. And we have recent intelligence. It says that French ships are boarding soldiers for attack in Ireland. You have 70 ships in your squadrons.
When all are manned and fitted, Your Majesty. As of now, the number available stands near 60.
So if the Dutch stay in port till the French come up, we will be ready.
And if the Dutch come sooner, Your Majesty, do I fight or wait?
You make that decision, Monk. I mean, Albemarle. As the situation dictates and as you see fit.
We will look for opportunities, Your Majesty, as at Gabbard and Lowestoft.
Splendid.
The Duke of Albemarle knew that he was outnumbered. He had warned the king, and the king simply said, you should do what you think prudent. And that was a terrible mistake, because the Duke of Albemarle took that to be an order to attack. The weather was rather poor, the seas were rough. The Dutch were at anchor and could not imagine that the English would attack. The wind, which was blowing hard from the southwest, would heel the English ships over so far that they would not be able to use their biggest guns on the lower deck.
But Albemarle sees an opportunity, turns his fleet, and heads straight for an exposed Dutch squadron. The Dutch finally realize that the English are attacking. The Dutch squadron under Tromp cuts its anchor cables and gets underway, just in time.
The fleets then engaged in a running fight for several hours. But the seas were so rough that the damage was not very great. Albemarle's intention had been to overwhelm this exposed division of the Dutch, and in that they completely failed.
As Albemarle approaches shallows, he signals his fleet to tack. But one English squadron does not see the signal and keeps on going. Just then, disaster strikes the Dutch.
Cornelis Tromp's flagship, the Hollandia, was involved in a collision and was completely disabled. The English admiral made straight for Tromp's flagship, through the Dutch fleet.
But Albemarle, already heading in the opposite direction, cannot support this bold move. The Dutch grapple the English attacker. The first Dutch Marines on board the English ship encounter fierce resistance. But the Marines from a second ship lay down planks and board in force. It is soon over. The Dutch capture 3 English ships. As night falls, the English Admiralty sends a fast boat down the channel with an urgent message for Rupert. Battle begun, return without delay.
The weather on the second day was much quieter than it was on the first day, and it was a hot day. The Dutch fleet with the lee gauge was at a considerable disadvantage, and the smoke from the guns tended to drift down so that they frequently couldn't see what was going on, as well as the windward fleet.
De Ruyter wants to gain the weather wind. He leads the Dutch fleet to break through the English line. But the rear squadron, Tromp's squadron, does not get through and is surrounded by English warships.
De Ruyter realized that Tromp was in difficulty. So he gathered a small squadron and sailed straight to Tromp's position and drove off the English ships that were attacking him.
By the end of the second day, with many ships damaged, Albemarle disengages and sails north.
The English on the third day realized that they had to retreat. Albemarle sent all of the damaged and smaller ships ahead as best they could, and he gathered up 16 of the largest ships, each of which could bring perhaps 6 to 8 guns to bear astern, and drew them up in a line abreast.
The Duke of Albemarle's heavy guns keep the Dutch at bay until the early afternoon, when he sights Rupert's squadron and sails to join it.
The English pilots, in all the confusion of the battle, had lost track of where they were, and they ran the fleet straight onto Galloper Sand, a nasty sandbank. Many of the big ships struck. All of them got off except one, the Royal Prince, a 92-gun 3-decker.
The Dutch easily capture the Prince, but de Ruyter orders it burned, not wanting to spare any ships taking it into port as a prize. He needs his full force of ships, now numbering about 70, for the next day's battle.
At the beginning of the 4th day, the Dutch held the wind.
Albemarle and Rupert decide to attack to regain the wind. The English fleet has over 50 ships, including Rupert's, that are undamaged, have a full supply of ammunition, and without casualties, have full crews.
The English ships broke through the Dutch and gained the wind, and in the process, split the Dutch fleet. At one point late in the day, it appeared that the English were winning the fight.
As de Ruyter sails north, he looks like he is abandoning the beleaguered ships and taking the rest of his fleet back to port.
The English believed that the Dutch were retiring, but de Ruyter suddenly tacked again directly on the English fleet with all of the strength that he had. And for the first time in the battle, the Dutch were able to make their numbers tell. At this point, the English were overwhelmed. The fleet fell into disorder, and several ships were captured.
The English withdraw into the Thames. De Ruyter, out of ammunition, heads home too. The carnage of this battle almost 4,000 killed and an equal number wounded. But the Dutch win their first important victory of the Second Anglo-Dutch War.
It was one of the greatest victories that the Dutch ever won over the English. They wrote about it in songs and struck medals for it.
Both sides learned valuable lessons from the 4 days battle. The English now clearly saw that with their new ships, the Dutch fleet had much greater firepower, and adopting English tactics, they now fought in line. The Dutch learned that even when outnumbered, the English would fight. The Dutch are soon to learn another lesson. No naval victory confers a permanent advantage. As long as the English can refit damaged ships and commission new ones, there will be another massive, bloody, ruinous battle. The war is far from over.